There comes a point in life where the pressure to meet expectations from family, friends, work, even society itself becomes so heavy that you forget one crucial thing. You were never meant to live for everyone else. You begin to feel it in the quiet moments, in the fatigue that doesn't go away, in the way you smile less and say yes when every part of you wants to say no. But something shifts when you finally draw a line and say, "This time, I choose me." That choice, though it may seem small, is a turning point that changes everything. This video is about that exact moment. Not the fantasy of running away from it all, but the real, honest transformation that begins when you stop betraying yourself to be accepted. What happens when you stop putting your needs last? When do you stop pleasing, overextending, and over-justifying? You reclaim your voice, your energy, and most importantly, your peace. The world may resist at first, but what comes next is clarity, alignment, and a life that finally feels like your own. If this message speaks to you, don't keep it to yourself. Subscribe for more content like this, and let's grow together. And if you've ever had to reclaim yourself from a life that wasn't yours, tell your story in the comments. I read everyone. You're not alone in this. Let's begin. 1. Face yourself. The first step to living authentically. There's a moment, usually quiet, often uncomfortable, when you finally stop long enough to realize you're not living your life. You're performing it, and it didn't happen all at once. It started with the small things. Taking the job because it was safe, agreeing to stay in a relationship because you've come this far, attending dinners you didn't enjoy, smiling at conversations that drained you, and saying yes to things you never really chose. Little by little, the authentic self got buried under expectations, not out of weakness, but survival. Because being yourself in a world built on approval and conformity can feel like standing naked in a snowstorm. You learn to layer up, you learn to adapt, but at what cost? That was the reality for my friend Emily. For 12 years, she worked in insurance, hit every performance target, and climbed the ladder steadily. But every morning felt heavier than the last. It wasn't burnout, not exactly. It was something deeper. A sense that she was disappearing in plain sight. One night, after a corporate dinner filled with small talk and fake laughs, she sat in her car, stared into the rearview mirror, and whispered, "Whose life am I living?" It wasn't a dramatic breakdown, just a quiet confrontation, one she had postponed for over a decade. And in that moment of brutal honesty, her real life began. Facing yourself doesn't mean tearing everything down in one go. It means daring to ask the questions you've been avoiding. Am I living in alignment with what I truly want? Or am I just trying not to disappoint people? It's easy to dismiss this as overthinking, but that discomfort in your chest when you agree to things you don't want, that's not anxiety, that's your soul calling you back. Most people silence that voice. They say it's not the right time, that things aren't bad enough to change. So they wait and wait until one day they no longer recognize themselves. The first step to putting yourself first is radical honesty. Not the kind you share in therapy sessions or post online, but the kind you admit to yourself when no one is watching. You start noticing when you're lying with your smile. You catch yourself saying it's fine when it isn't. You recognize that you've confused obligation with love and performance with purpose. This internal reckoning isn't always loud or painful. Sometimes it's a quiet sadness, the kind that slips in when you realize you've been editing yourself for years to keep the peace. But here's what happens when you finally face yourself. The fog begins to lift, not all at once, but slowly, gently, you start to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. And in that remembering, something beautiful happens. You begin to reclaim emotional self-prioritization. You stop outsourcing your worth to people who don't even understand your inner world. You no longer chase approval like a currency. You begin to define your life not by how it looks to others, but by how it feels to live in it. That doesn't mean the journey gets easier right away. In fact, putting yourself first often creates friction at the start. People around you may not understand. They're used to the version of you that said yes without hesitation, the version that didn't ask questions, that smiled even when something felt wrong. But their discomfort is not your responsibility. Their confusion is not your cue to return to your old self. What you're doing is not selfish, it's necessary. Because you cannot live authentically while pretending everything is fine. And something unexpected unfolds as you commit to living more honestly. You stop feeling drained all the time. You start making decisions based not on fear or habit, but on quiet certainty. The people who truly see you remain. The ones who are only there for the performance slowly fade. And that, too, is part of the healing. You stop wasting energy maintaining a version of yourself that was never real to begin with. Putting yourself first is not about grand gestures. It's not quitting your job tomorrow or cutting ties with everyone. Sometimes it begins with the smallest decision, saying no to something you used to say yes to automatically. Sitting with a feeling instead of brushing it off. Telling the truth when it's easier to be agreeable. These small acts become anchors. They hold you steady when life tries to pull you back into roles that no longer fit. Over time, they become a lifestyle. A way of being rooted in authenticity rather than performance. You will feel resistance. That's how you know it's working, because you're breaking patterns that were never yours to carry. You're creating space for a life that actually makes sense to your soul. And that life? It begins the moment you stop running and finally look yourself in the eye, not with shame or judgment, but with deep, unshakable respect. That is the first and most powerful step in choosing yourself above all else. 2. Let go of the familiar. Unlock a life that truly matters. There's a strange comfort in what's familiar, even when it no longer serves us. The job that drains us but pays the bills. The relationship that's lost its spark but still feels safer than the unknown. The daily routine that keeps us busy but leaves us feeling hollow. We stay not because we're thriving, but because we're afraid to lose control. Familiarity becomes a kind of emotional security blanket. Predictable, steady, and numbing. But here's the truth we often avoid. Nothing changes until we loosen our grip on what feels safe and step into what feels right. My neighbor James is a man many would describe as reliable. Retired at 62, his days were a precise loop. Wake up at 6, read the paper, drink 2 cups of coffee, water the plants, and sit in silence. From the outside, it looked peaceful, but I noticed something else. The way he sighed a little too often. The way he brought up the past more than the present, and how he spoke of retirement like a slow erasure. One day, after months of these quiet rituals, James signed up for a basic pottery class at the local library. It wasn't a big deal, no reinvention, no grand declaration. But the week after his first session, he said something that hit me deeply. I don't need to do anything big. I just needed to stop living like I had nothing left to try. That shift, small as it seemed, was the beginning of a life that started to matter again. Letting go of the familiar isn't about recklessness. It's about reclaiming the parts of you that went silent under routine. It's acknowledging that safety, when stretched too far, becomes a cage. It's not that routines or commitments are bad. They're not. But when they start to replace growth, creativity, and emotional alignment, we slowly drift away from ourselves. The life you're meant to live rarely exists inside your comfort zone. It waits beyond the edges, just far enough that you need to stretch, risk, and trust your emotional self-prioritization to reach it. Most of us don't even realize how tightly we hold on to what's familiar until something or someone tries to change it. You'll hear yourself say things like, "At least I know what to expect," or "Better the devil you know." But ask yourself this: is familiarity really peace, or is it just a polished form of fear? If you've ever stayed in a role, habit, or relationship just because it's what you've always done, then you already know the answer. Familiarity tricks us into thinking we're choosing stability when, in reality, we're avoiding uncertainty, and in doing so, we're sacrificing growth. When you finally put yourself first, you begin to see that your life wasn't meant to be lived on repeat. You start noticing the subtle ways your soul has been asking for something more. That ache you feel on Sunday night before returning to the same uninspiring routine. That flicker of restlessness when someone asks you what excites you and you don't have an answer. Those aren't weaknesses. They're signals. They're reminders that your inner peace isn't something you find by clinging to what's known. It's something you build by honoring what feels true, even when it's unfamiliar. But make no mistake, letting go is hard. The familiar has history. It holds your memories, your habits, and your sense of identity. Stepping away from it can feel like erasing who you were. Yet it's not about erasure, it's about evolution. Letting go doesn't mean abandoning your past. It means carrying forward only what still belongs in your future. You're not running from anything. You're choosing what matters now. And what happens when you dare to do that? The world begins to open. Slowly, then all at once. New ideas, new relationships, new energy. It doesn't come from magic, it comes from alignment. When you let go of the life you're merely surviving, you start to discover the life that makes you feel alive. And that shift, while invisible to the world at first, becomes undeniable in time. You move differently, speak more truthfully, smile with something real behind it, and people notice, not because you've changed everything, but because you finally stopped pretending you were fine with the life you had outgrown. Letting go of the familiar isn't about abandoning responsibility. It's about rejecting the quiet resignation that tells you this is all there is. It's about making space for breath, for clarity, for the version of yourself that still believes there's more to life for. And maybe, just maybe, that version has been waiting all along. So if your days feel heavy and your heart feels restless, it may be time. Not to break everything apart, but to loosen your grip, to ask new questions, and to let go, gently, bravely, of what no longer feels like home. Because only when you do, will you finally unlock a life that's not just familiar, but meaningful. 3. Listen to your inner voice. Awaken intuition and inner power. There's a quiet voice inside you that has always known what feels right, even when your logic says otherwise. It doesn't shout, it doesn't explain, it just feels. But for most of us, that voice has been silenced over time, drowned out by noise, advice, obligations, and the unspoken pressure to do what looks smart instead of what feels true. We've been trained to trust reason, lists, and what others call practicality. But intuition was never meant to be practical. It was meant to be personal. And when you finally put yourself first, that voice starts to return. Faint at first, but unmistakable once you remember how to listen. I still remember the night I almost made a decision that would have changed everything. On paper, for the better. A job offer had come in. A prestigious position in a new city, with a salary that made my breath catch and a title that would impress anyone who saw it. Everything about it screamed yes. Everyone around me said the same. But the night before I was supposed to sign the contract, something inside me stirred. It wasn't fair. It wasn't nerves. It was a kind of heaviness, like the weight of walking towards something that wasn't mine. I didn't have a rational reason. No red flags. No facts. Just a deep, quiet no from within. I turned the offer down. 6 months later, that company went through massive layoffs. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt affirmed. Because for the first time in a long time, I had trusted myself when no one else understood. My intuition wasn't logical, but it was right. Right for me. That's the power of listening to your inner voice. It doesn't guarantee safety. It guarantees alignment. And in a world obsessed with data, speed, and validation, alignment is a radical act. You can read 1,000 self-help books, follow endless advice, and still end up miserable if none of it feels right in your gut. The problem isn't that you don't know what to do. It's that you've forgotten how to trust what you already know. Your intuition is part of your emotional self-prioritization. It's your mind's way of whispering what your soul already feels. When you ignore it, you don't just miss opportunities. You disconnect from your power. You begin to rely too much on outside voices, which often reflect their own fears more than your potential. And over time, that habit of outsourcing your direction erodes your clarity. You start asking everyone else what's best for you. You begin doubting what feels right simply because it doesn't sound right to others. But the moment you stop seeking external permission to feel what you feel, something incredible happens. You reconnect with the part of you that was never confused to begin with. It's not louder, it's just clearer. And it always was. You just needed to remove the clutter, the opinions, the fear of being misunderstood. The pressure is to explain your choices with bulletproof logic. Putting yourself first means learning to listen inwardly again. Not to the loudest thought, but to the truest one. Not the voice shaped by fear, but the one rooted in inner peace. And this is not about being impulsive. It's about being honest. Your intuition isn't reckless. It's anchored in experience, emotion, and an unspoken understanding of what resonates with your authentic self. When you start to follow it, your life doesn't just change, it aligns. Opportunities come not because you chase them, but because you've created space for them by letting go of what never felt right. This practice doesn't start with big decisions. It starts with tiny pauses. The moment before you say yes to something, do you feel excited or drained? The moment someone asks you for a favor, do you feel open or burdened? These micro moments are where intuition trains you. And each time you respond honestly, even if it's inconvenient, you strengthen that internal muscle. And here's the truth. Most people won't say out loud. Sometimes your intuition will lead you away from what everyone else applauds. It might tell you to walk away from a good job, leave a stable relationship, or say no to an offer that looks perfect. And people will question you. They'll ask why. They'll expect a neat, rational answer. But intuition doesn't work that way. It isn't a debate. It's a compass. And when you follow it, even without evidence, you start living a life that feels tailored to your soul, not stitched together from everyone else's fabric. Listening to your inner voice isn't some mystical ritual. It's the everyday act of checking in with your true self. Ask, does this feel like me? Before saying yes. Of letting go of the need to justify what feels right, and of realizing that no amount of logic can replace the clarity of calm conviction. So if you've been waiting for a sign, this is it. The life you're searching for, the one that brings peace, purpose, and presence, begins the moment you stop silencing your intuition and start letting it lead. Not blindly, but bravely. Because of that quiet voice inside you, it's not just a feeling, it's your truest guide back to yourself. 4. Embrace the shadow. Unleash the strength you once feared. We all have a part of ourselves we wish wasn't there. The jealousy we pretend not to feel. The anger we're ashamed to admit. The insecurity we hide behind achievements. And more often than not, we've been taught that to be a good person, we must suppress these parts. Keep them hidden, act above them, silence them with positivity. But the truth is, what you avoid in yourself doesn't disappear. It waits. It grows in the dark. And eventually it shows up in ways you don't expect. Short tempers, sudden guilt, emotional triggers that make no sense on the surface. You don't overcome the shadow by pretending it's not there. You overcome it by turning toward it, by embracing it, understanding it, and reclaiming the power it contains. That is what it means to truly choose yourself. A few years ago, my niece shared something that stopped me in my tracks. She said, "Every time one of my friends gets praised, I feel jealous. And then I feel awful because I hate feeling like that." She didn't want advice. She did not feel broken. I didn't tell her to be grateful or to focus on herself. Instead, I asked, "Why do you think that feeling shows up?" We talked. She realized it wasn't about the praise her friends received. It was about the lack of acknowledgement she felt in her own life. She wasn't proud of that jealousy, but it carried information. It told her what she needed to see. That conversation was the beginning of her transformation, not by killing the envy, but by facing it without shame. And in doing so, she became more self-aware, more confident, and more honest. This is the work most people run from. We all want growth, but we want it sanitized. We want peace, but we resist the discomfort that makes it possible. Your shadow isn't your enemy. It's the part of you that holds your most unprocessed truths. And when you reject it, you reject pieces of your own story. But when you accept it, something remarkable happens. The emotions you once feared become your teachers. The parts of you that used to feel unlovable become a source of compassion, depth, and strength. You stop being afraid of your own humanness, and in that self-acceptance, you find emotional grounding that can't be shaken. Choosing yourself above all else doesn't mean curating a perfect version of who you are. It means standing beside yourself when it's messy, when you're jealous, when you're angry, when you're scared. It's saying, even now, I will not abandon myself. And ironically, it's that exact commitment to your whole self that creates the stability and calmness others spend their lives chasing. When you suppress the shadow, you disconnect from your emotional clarity. You begin reacting instead of responding. You become controlled by emotions you don't understand because you've never paused long enough to explore them. But when you embrace the shadow, you reclaim the space between stimulus and response. You become unshakable, not because you're emotionless, but because you're emotionally integrated. You no longer fear what rises inside you. You listen, you learn, and you choose with awareness. This work isn't loud. It doesn't come with applause. No one sees the night you sit alone and name the feelings you once judged. No one claps when you stop gaslighting yourself into "I'm fine." But you feel it. You feel the weight lifting. You feel the internal tension loosening. You feel the energy that was once wasted on self-rejection now fueling your growth. That is real power. When you stop trying to be someone else's version of good and start being your own version of whole, your life changes from the inside out. Your relationships deepen because you're no longer pretending. Your choices become clearer because they're no longer filtered through shame. You find inner peace not because you've eliminated the shadow, but because you've befriended it. And what you feared in yourself? That too soft, too angry, too needy, too much part of you, it becomes your compass. It tells you where your boundaries are. It tells you what matters. It tells you who you've been all along under the armor. You don't lose control by embracing the shadow. You gain mastery. Because no one can use what you've accepted about yourself against you. This is what it looks like to truly put yourself first. Not to prioritize only your best, most polished parts, but to choose your entire being, warts and all, with tenderness and unwavering respect. It's the bravest act of emotional independence. And it's the kind of strength that transforms not just how you see yourself, but how you show up in the world. 5. Set boundaries. Protect the peace no one else can give you. Choosing yourself doesn't always look like transformation. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like saying not today to the same people you've always said yes to. Setting boundaries is one of the most misunderstood acts of self-respect. People often confuse it with coldness, rejection, or isolation. But boundaries are not walls. They are gates. They don't keep the world out. They allow in only what honors your peace. And that peace, once reclaimed, becomes the foundation for everything else. Without it, you are constantly leaking energy, emotionally overextended, silently resentful, and chronically exhausted. When you finally decide to put yourself first, boundaries are not optional. They are essential. My cousin Laura was always the one who carried it all. The family relied on her. Rides to the airport, last-minute babysitting, and emotional support at every crisis. She gave without limit and received very little in return. Her phone was never silent, and for years she wore this role like a badge of honor until one day she couldn't anymore. She didn't have a breakdown. She didn't yell. She just started replying to messages a little slower. She said no to non-urgent requests. She prioritized her rest, her space, and her needs. At first, people were confused. Some were even angry. "What's wrong with you lately?" they asked. But nothing was wrong. For the first time in her life, everything was finally right. Months later, she said something quietly powerful. "It's strange. Once I stopped rescuing everyone, they started rescuing themselves. And I finally felt like I could breathe again." This is what boundaries do. They restore breath. They give you back your energy, your time, and your emotional self-prioritization. Not everyone will understand at first. That's part of the cost. People who are used to your compliance will see your clarity as resistance. But their discomfort is not your emergency. Their disappointment is not your guilt to carry. Because boundaries are not about controlling others. They are about protecting yourself. And the truth is, you are not responsible for how others feel about your needs. You are responsible for honoring those needs, even when it's inconvenient. When you don't set boundaries, you invite people to write the script of your life with their needs as the headline. You stop being a person and start becoming a utility, available, expected, and invisible. But the moment you draw a line, even a quiet one, you reclaim authorship. You begin to live not out of fear or habit, but from intention. And that shift, though subtle, is life-changing. Suddenly, you stop saying yes out of obligation. You stop explaining yourself to people who've never once asked how you really feel. You begin to understand that protecting your energy isn't selfish, it's survival. The resistance you face when you set boundaries is not proof that you're doing something wrong. It's proof that you're doing something different, and difference always disrupts familiarity. You may lose some people along the way. That's okay. Those who love you will adjust. Those who only loved your usefulness were never truly with you to begin with. The deeper truth is that boundaries reveal relationships, not ruin them. They separate those who want access to you from those who want connection with you. Choosing yourself through boundaries doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop carrying what was never yours. It means you release the need to be everything for everyone and finally allow yourself to be something for you. And when you do, you'll notice the peace. It won't be loud or dramatic. It will be a quiet shift. You'll breathe easier, sleep deeper, smile more honestly, and you'll start making decisions that come not from fear of losing others, but from love for keeping yourself. The world doesn't teach us how to say no. It teaches us how to endure. But endurance without limits becomes erosion. You cannot pour endlessly without running dry. You cannot give love that you no longer feel. You cannot be present when your mind is constantly negotiating how much of yourself you can afford to lose today. So stop trying to be noble at the cost of being whole. You were not born to be the emotional safety net for everyone else. You were born to live with clarity, with calmness, with alignment. And that begins by drawing lines, not to push people away, but to welcome your own self back in. When you protect your peace, you stop begging others to respect it. You no longer chase validation or permission. You simply stand where you are, anchored. You make your needs known, not with apologies, but with quiet confidence. And the people meant for you? They won't be offended by your boundaries. They'll be grateful for your honesty. This is what happens when you finally choose yourself. You stop over-explaining, overextending, and overcompensating. You begin to see that your time, your energy, and your well-being are sacred. And the peace that comes from honoring that truth, no one can give it to you. No one can take it away. It's yours, always was. You just needed to protect it. 6. Align within. Watch the world mirror your inner truth. Life doesn't respond to what you say. It responds to what you believe. And what you believe deep down quietly shapes everything. From the way you walk into a room, to the way people treat you, speak you, stay with you, or walk away. That's why choosing yourself begins not with action, but with alignment. Not with bold declarations, but with honest reflection. Because when your inner world is in conflict, when you carry resentment, self-doubt, or the need to perform, your external world reflects that dissonance back at you like a mirror. The good news is that the mirror works both ways. When you begin to realign with your truth, your energy shifts, and the world shifts with it. I remember meeting a man during a weekend workshop who had lived most of his adult life in the background. He had spent years in corporate spaces where his opinions were overlooked, his boundaries quietly crossed, and his identity slowly chipped away by a need to keep the peace. On the outside, he was polite, reliable, and agreeable. On the inside, he felt invisible. But something changed when he began to focus inward. He didn't make dramatic moves. He started writing every morning, not to solve his problems, but to hear his own voice again. He practiced saying what he really felt, first in his journal, then in small conversations. Eventually, he left his high-stress job and accepted a quieter role that paid less, but gave him time to breathe. I didn't need to make the world softer, he told me. I just needed to stop hardening myself. And slowly, the people who drained him faded away. They weren't pushed. They simply no longer resonated with his energy. And in their place, new people showed up. Gentler, more curious, more aligned. He hadn't changed the world. He had changed his frequency. That is the secret no one tells you. The world doesn't meet you where you pretend to be. It meets you where you truly are. When you're living in misalignment, your life becomes filled with friction. You say yes when you mean no, and then wonder why you feel overwhelmed. You keep people close who unsettle your peace, and then ask why your mind feels heavy. You force smiles in rooms that make you shrink, and then question why you feel unseen. But none of that is random. It's your energy signaling a mismatch. And when you finally put yourself first, truly first, your alignment begins to send a different message. A message that says, I know who I am. I know what I allow. I know what I walk away from. This is not magic. It's not manifesting. It's emotional integrity. It's inner clarity that shapes outer reality. When your thoughts, values, and actions begin to match, your life stops feeling like a performance. It starts to feel like peace. And you no longer have to push or chase or prove. You become a magnet, not because you're louder, but because you're truer. What is meant for you can finally find you, because you're no longer hiding behind someone else's script. Aligning with doesn't mean life becomes perfect. It means you stop betraying yourself just to make it tolerable. You stop compromising your truth to make others more comfortable. You stop giving versions of yourself that cost you your joy. And yes, people may notice, some might pull away, others may be confused. But this is the cost of clarity. Not everyone is meant to walk with you at every stage of your becoming. And that's not a loss, that's alignment. True self-worth doesn't shout. It doesn't beg. It doesn't seek approval in rooms where your soul is ignored. It simply exists in how you speak, in what you tolerate, in what you allow to stay. And when you hold that energy consistently, the world can't help but mirror it. You start finding conversations that nourish you, jobs that don't leave you drained, relationships that don't require translation. You begin to feel safe, not because the world changed, but because you finally stopped fighting yourself. So many people live reactive lives, adjusting constantly to survive environments they were never meant to be in. But the real shift happens when you stop adjusting and start aligning. When you decide that your inner peace is not negotiable. When you treat your emotional boundaries not as a luxury, but as the ground beneath your feet. And in doing so, you send a silent but powerful message to the world. This is who I am, and this is what I no longer accept. The transformation is subtle but profound. You speak less, but your words carry weight. You move slower, but your presence lands stronger. You expect less noise and find more clarity. And the more consistent you are with this internal calibration, the more effortless life becomes. Not because it's easy, but because it's honest. This is what happens when you align within. Your life stops being a negotiation and becomes a reflection. Your energy speaks before you do. And finally, without force or fear, the world begins to match what you've always quietly known you were worthy of. 7. Inspire through authenticity. Lead others simply by being you. Sometimes the most powerful influence doesn't come from speeches, titles, or strategies. It comes from presence, from how someone carries themselves when no one is watching, from how they make choices that don't need defending, from how they simply live in alignment with their truth, even when no one claps. That's the quiet force of authenticity. It doesn't chase attention, it commands respect. Not through performance, but through consistency. And when you choose to put yourself first, not loudly, not with defiance, but with steadiness, you become something rare in a world addicted to noise. You become a mirror that gently reminds others of what they've forgotten in themselves. My friend Ben has always been someone who never talks too much about values or goals. He doesn't preach or correct or explain. He just lives in a way that's unmistakably honest. He works hard during the day, but never stays late. He spends his evenings walking in nature or having dinner with his kids. He doesn't chase promotions, doesn't post motivational quotes, and rarely engages in gossip or judgment. At first, people rolled their eyes, said he was too soft or not ambitious enough. But over time, something changed. One of his coworkers, who used to mock him for being so slow-paced, pulled him aside one afternoon and asked, "How do you stay so calm? I'm exhausted living like this, and I don't even know what I'm chasing anymore." Ben smiled and said nothing dramatic. Just, "I stopped chasing. I just started choosing." That's the power of living authentically. You don't need to convince. Your peace speaks for itself. And in a world so used to pretending, being real becomes revolutionary. When you prioritize inner peace over image, presence over performance, self-worth over approval, you become a quiet leader. Not because you have followers, but because you inspire reflection. You give people permission, not with words but by example, to return to their own truth. Authenticity is contagious, not because it's flashy, but because it's grounded. People are starving for something real. They've grown tired of curated perfection, of forced smiles and silent suffering. So when they encounter someone who doesn't apologize for being themselves, it disrupts their rhythm. It makes them pause, not out of envy, but out of longing. They begin to wonder if they too can live differently, more slowly, more truthfully, more freely. This is why choosing yourself is never just about you. It's about the invisible ripple effect you create without even knowing it. When you say no with clarity, someone else learns they're allowed to do the same. When you stop over-explaining, someone realizes they don't have to justify their boundaries. When you choose rest over productivity, someone sees that their worth isn't defined by output. Your courage becomes a signal, a subtle invitation for others to reclaim their own authenticity. But this doesn't happen by force. You don't need to correct people or show them the way. You just need to live yours. Fully, imperfectly, honestly. The quiet confidence that comes from living in alignment is more powerful than any argument. It doesn't seek to dominate, it simply shines. And that shine doesn't blind, it illuminates. It helps people see their own reflection more clearly. What often holds people back from authenticity is the fear of judgment, of being misunderstood, dismissed, or even resented. And yes, that fear is valid, but the cost of avoiding your truth is far greater. Because when you shrink yourself to be palatable, you not only betray who you are, you rob others of the chance to grow through your example. You dim the light that might have helped someone else find theirs. You don't have to be perfect to be powerful, you just have to be real. To speak when it matters, to be silent when it's wise, to walk away when peace is threatened, to stand firm when your boundaries are tested. This is emotional in action, not loud, not defensive, but deeply rooted in inner strength. When you live this way, the world around you changes, not always immediately, not always noticeably, but deeply. The people who resonate with your truth will find you. The ones who don't will fade, not because you push them away, but because you stopped bending to be acceptable. And those who stay, they stay because of who you truly are, not who you pretended to be. This is what happens when you finally choose yourself. You stop performing, you stop justifying, you start living. And that life, grounded in emotional self-prioritization and inner peace, doesn't just nourish you, it reminds everyone around you that they're allowed to come home to themselves too. You don't need a platform to lead. You don't need to teach. Just be. That's more than enough. Because in a world full of noise, your authenticity might just be the quiet that someone else needs to finally hear their own voice again. When you finally choose yourself above all else, everything begins to change. Not in one loud moment, but in the quiet decisions you make daily. You stop reacting to life and start responding with intention. You begin to build emotional independence, set clear boundaries, and reconnect with the authentic self you've buried under years of pressure and approval seeking. Life becomes less about survival and more about alignment. Your peace no longer depends on others. It flows from within because you've made space for your own truth. As you protect your energy, honor your values, and stop living for validation, the world mirrors your transformation. People shift, opportunities shift, even your thoughts feel lighter. You no longer chase connection, you attract it, and you no longer apologize for needing space, clarity, or calm. This isn't selfishness, it's emotional self-prioritization, and it's how lasting peace begins. Now it's your turn. Have you ever made a decision that finally put your needs first? What happened next? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might inspire someone else. And if this message resonated with you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more grounded, powerful truths like this. Let's keep growing together.